This is the American Law Journal.
What's killing our democracy? Why is there so much anger in American politics? Perhaps it boils down to one word: gerrymandering. Good evening, I'm Christopher Naughton. This is the American Law Journal, and our political standard is one person, one vote, where voters choose their legislators. But in the last generation, has the opposite been true? Gina Passarella with ALM explains.
I'm gerrymandering, and I approve this message. And I'll bring change and hope or whatever by picking my voters and redrawing district maps to ensure I always get reelected. Heck.
Our anger at politics is real.
We live in a society where the people fear the government when the government should fear its people.
They're holding on to the power rather than giving the power back to the people.
So we always see about people being fed up. We hate our politicians. We hate our candidates. There are no choices this year. And really, who's at the other end of this arm that keeps hitting us in the face? It's ourselves. We don't get involved in the process. I think Samantha Bee said it best in one of her programs. The most important election of your lifetime wasn't 2012 or 2008. It was 2010. It was that interim election. It's when there's not much on the line, maybe a congressional race, maybe just your state legislators. But once again, for most people watching tonight, it's the state legislators that draw the maps, and that decides who ends up going to Congress. Let's take a look at George Beatty's district. That, again, he ran in 2012. And George, here's what your district looked like in 2002. That looks pretty compact and contiguous. Here's what it looks like in 2012. The Washington Post, again, called this goofy kicking Daffy Duck. I actually think it looks more like the Energizer Bunny. But that's what you had to fight against.
It's simply outrageous, and it's bad for democracy. It's bad for our nation, whether you're on the Republican side or the Democratic side. It forces the candidates to an extreme. So if it's a safer Republican district, it forces that Republican to go far to the right because he or she is more afraid of a challenge from the base than from the other party. Conversely, with the Democratic side, the same thing. It forces this polarization, and we've seen discord in Washington and in Harrisburg like never before.
Right, and that's exactly what's happened, Rajiv.
Right.
We're really seeing, the real election takes place in the primary.
That's exactly what I was thinking, which is that primary elections have become so well funded and so and have become really what ultimately chooses who it is that's going to be elected for that position.
Well, joining us from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania tonight at the state capitol is Senator Lisa Pascola. She has been representing citizens there in Pennsylvania in the 18th senatorial district since 1994, and seated next to her is Representative David Parker, elected in 2014 to serve the citizens of the 115th. And while it's always refreshing to see a Democrat and a Republican sit down and talk about almost anything, but especially gerrymandering, the question I have is, why now? Why so late? And have we been ignoring the state constitution of Pennsylvania, like a lot of state constitutions across this country have probably been ignored when it comes to gerrymandering?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, that's why Representative Parker and I are introducing this, because we formed a bicameral, bipartisan work group on what we do about redistricting. And gerrymandering is just a product. I mean, you need redistricting, but gerrymandering is just a manipulation of the redistricting process.
Why should we be confident, even with a Democrat and Republican sitting down together, that true change is going to take place here? What's it going to take to convince this state, like many other states across the union, that it's time to get rid of state legislators drawing our maps, usually from one party, and get an independent commission in there instead?
Well, you're right. We can't hope to take the politics out of this process unless we take the politicians out of the redistricting process. And the thing is, I'm confident that we can make this change if the public is engaged and understands why this is so important. I mean, our redistricting process is the very foundation of competitive elections, a competitive legislature, and how competitive a legislature is going to be. It's the very rock, it's the foundation of a representative democracy. And I don't think the public truly understands what's at stake here. And as these programs educate individuals, I believe that the voters will rise up and demand this change. That's why we're here trying to promote this.
And Matt, it's hard enough to get people interested in senatorial or House representative elections nationally. But really what people need to be focusing on are their own state legislators, because again, they draw the maps. And in your research, Matt, you've got to find that wanting.
I agree. I think that people focus on as we see this election, the 2016 cycle, on the president, and that's where most of the news coverage goes to, where most of the laws that affect people on a daily basis are the local laws with their state legislatures and the local governing bodies.
I'm happy to see Representative Parker. You indicated that he was elected in 2014, so he wasn't at the crime scene in 2010 and 2011.
Representative Parker.
Well, no, in fact,
Hey.
and I'm actually in a district that was cut for a Democrat.
Well, Representative Parker, let me throw the question to you then. Do you think you're going to have a tougher road to hoe with your colleagues than Senator Boscola?
Yeah, and actually we had a hearing this past summer on the bill in the State Government Committee. And it was interesting, both the minority chairman and the majority chairman were opposed to the idea of having an unaccountable group draw the lines.
And bottom line is you've got to get this done before the next census, 2020, correct?
Right.
Absolutely. Yes. But the leaders that are drawing the maps don't want to make the change. If you had the power of the pen, would you want to change it? And that's what we have, 5 people, only 5 people with the power of the pen to determine these legislative districts. And that's what's so wrong.
Let me ask you folks one last question, because I have here the independent redistricting pledge. You folks are acting, you can find this on the ALJ Facebook page, by the way, folks. You're actually asking people to write candidates and tell them you want them to pledge that they're going to move in the direction of fair redistricting, right?
Correct. Because, you know, sometimes people talk about how there's so much for government reform when they're running for an election. Well, prove it. Show that you're in support of this major change, because I'm convinced that unless we have some kind of fairness in how we redistrict, that is probably the most important government reform change that we could ever ask for.
Senator Boscola and Representative David Parker, good luck. A bit of an uphill climb, but I'm very encouraged, again, to see Democrats and Republicans sitting down, trying to get something done, an eminently fair goal. I appreciate your efforts. Good luck. Call it what you will, the gig economy, the sharing economy, the freelance economy. Think Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, to name a few. Employment in America is changing dramatically. What are its implications, and why is it spilling over into the courts?
That inspires companies to not want to classify people properly as employees.
Well, the big losers, according to some, are the workers. Despite the fact they're getting some flexibility, they're losing benefits and protections. The government, because they're certainly losing taxes. And although there may not be much empathy out there for lawyers or insurance companies, the insurance companies are also losing work. And by way of that segue, let me introduce to the program tonight from Washington, D.C., this evening, Jim Quiggle, who's the Director of Communications with the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud. And Jim, in this gig economy, it's independent contractors and it's employers who are gaming the system, no?
Well, we often see, it depends on which we're talking about. Misclassification is a big word for simply a dishonest employer who dodges paying state-required workers' compensation insurance in order to fatten up their profits at the expense of workers.
And on the other side of the equation, and again, this Uber class action was just settled in California, although it's still being litigated across the country. You can't tell me that there aren't thousands of drivers who are driving Uber cars and going back to their insurance companies and not telling them that they're actually driving commercially. That's another big suck on the insurance industry. That's another sense of deception or fraud.
Well, it's also dishonest competition.
50 million people in the United States alone have identified themselves as freelancers. That means 50 million entrepreneurs, 50 million people learning to manage their own business, figure out how to grow it, serve customers, build our economy. Are there ways that the laws can support that entrepreneurship rather than diminish it?
Let's take a look at a video here. And this is a woman over 50, approaching retirement, wants to do some work on the side. Let's watch.
So I had a dream, and it said to me I could make a lot of money. So I went down, picked up my phone, and started driving right away.
Gordon now drives as much as 50 hours a week, calling Uber her pastime. She says she can make up to $850 a week as a driver partner.
So the question I have watching that video is she aware of the insurance rates she's going to have to pay? Is she aware of her own liability? Is she aware of the cost of driving that car, safeguarding her passengers. And look, I agree with Jonathan. You know, ginning up entrepreneurship in America, great idea. But how many of these people going into this economy are really aware of the pitfalls and the costs? They're maybe skipping out on insurance, as Jim Quiggle was just saying a moment ago, and they're probably not aware, spending 50 hours a week in their car, that $800 isn't all theirs.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I have advised a lot of clients who basically have left corporate America, maybe not voluntarily, and would love to get another full-time job, but it's not forthcoming.
Robin, you're right. And kids these days, the millennials, don't trust big companies. They saw their parents laid off. They saw offers off the table. They're not excited about working in these companies. They feel safer, more secure, building their own business, freelancing, than they do working for a company and being at the risk of that employer.
They don't want to sell their soul to the company store, Jonathan.
And in addition to that, they don't want to lose their job on the whim of a manager as they saw their mother or father or aunt.
But what they do want is a level playing field. And I think this is part of the transition. And in some ways, there's not really a whole lot of, you know, sometimes between plaintiffs and defense attorneys, we have great duke outs. It's a wonderful thing. But in some ways, there's not a whole lot of disagreement here. I think Anthony's right. This train has left the station.
Oh, yeah.
We're going there.
But
how do we get there?
Here's one of the problems. So you said that people might be doing these things without really understanding the full implications. So here's the irony and the contradiction in sort of the application of old, stale, traditional legal principles. So if Uber were to establish a detailed set of principles that sets out for every Uber driver the kind of insurance that they need to take, all of the implications, all right, which is exactly what Federal Express did for its drivers. The courts are going to say
they're employees.
They're employees, they're not independent contractors. So the companies are sort of caught in the middle. They're in this vice where they can do neither right nor wrong.
I'm completely in support of what both Michael and Anthony has said. The laws need to be changed to fit the 21st century. In the work that we did in the book Agile Talent that we recently published, one of the things that was awfully important was, in addition to the law, how well are organizations using these folks and how productively have they managed these folks. And there are clearly some ways in which organizations can do a better job of building a positive win-win relationship with every one of those independent workers, every one of those freelancers. In addition to the legal protections, there are good practices of management that need to be added, need to be formed, and need to be put in place.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, Jonathan, maybe people say, yeah, I'd love to be an entrepreneur. Well, a lot of people get involved in multi-level marketing. And part of the knock on the gig economy has been the guys at the top are doing really nice. The guys in the middle, they're working hard, they're working hard, they're working hard. And there's a ceiling of sorts. They're never going to get anywhere close to those people that started that MLM. And you know, Anthony, maybe I can get a little sympathy for the DOL here from you, perhaps because you're saying, look, we need new definitions. This train has left the station. We know it's coming. It's here. It's been here. It's only going to grow. So the Department of Labor is struggling with these definitions as well. A little sympathy for the devil here?
Well, I wouldn't call them the devil.
Just a phrase I had to pull out of my hat. But someone that you folks do duke with.
But I do think that they create law in a very bureaucratic way, and they don't really understand sort of the tectonic changes that are occurring within the economy.
But there have been abuses with misclassification in this country.
There's no doubt
So it's
about
a yeoman's effort is going to be what it's going to take for the DOL to prevail. And what I mean by prevail is to really make it good for both the employer and the independent contractor in this country, so that both of those entities can be happy.
Well, I think a lot of it's about, you know, the fact that if you're misclassified, then you're exempt from a number of the laws. In particular, DOL is concerned about the Fair Labor Standards Act, which means if you're an independent contractor and you're working 60 hours a week, you're not getting time and a half for that 20 hours, more than 40 that you're working. So those are the issues. And the trouble for employers is if you get it wrong, and these are close calls often that are being made, the liability is huge, and they're all sorts of class actions going on across the country. I mean, this has become one of the great plaintiff litigation mills of the 21st century.
Right out of Forbes magazine, Robin.
But now that you have the higher threshold,